Wellness and Good Blessings. I am Dr. Magazine RichWell, and I am coming to you on behalf of the College of Metaphysical Studies, or otherwise, some people would call it TCOM. And I am here with Mr. Michael Sweeny. Michael, would you please introduce yourself, what it is that your spiritual gift is, and what it is that you do for a profession?
Oh, well, I'm the kind of guy that when you see me in the supermarket and ask how I'm doing, I say, well, I'm ornery as ever, but you can ignore me. I'm retired privacy and security consultant, and my specialty is helping stalking victims. I've worked with over 12,000 over several decades' time, and I have founded the Free Will Society to continue in that work to provide the only proven solution really for almost any form of stalking. And I hope we can talk more about that later today. Yeah. I don't know what my spiritual gift is. I have been very blessed by God. When I was 6 years old, I'm pretty certain I had a conversation with God, and a child's understanding of things is kind of different than an adult. So I didn't necessarily know all the things I would like to know if I was having a conversation with God. But I knew that Jesus was around. My dad was an atheist, and my mom was a non-attending Baptist. He was baptized as a Baptist, but she never really went to church, either as a child or as an adult, simply because of the fact they lived way out in the country. So I was not really particularly church, but I did understand that there was Jesus, and so I talked with God, and I asked for things that I thought were, important to me, and he said, okay, more or less. And all those things have come true in my entire life. I have been protected. I have been in helicopter crashes, train crashes. I've had people try to assassinate me. I've been in many life-threatening situations, including being a stalking victim myself, having people trying to break into my home while I'm there 3 nights in a row, and dealing with all of that strictly with my faith. And it has worked to the point I can tell you that faith is extremely important in dealing with powers and principalities which tend to be behind most stalking, either because the person who's the stalker is mentally ill, perhaps possessed by demons, or because it comes from persons or groups who are affiliated with powers and principalities in a very direct way, i.e. government or evil corporations to try to accentuate. But just to give you one example, I actually had a voice come into my head saying, go to the restroom and crack the door. I would get up out of my work seat, go to the restroom and crack the door, and I would hear somebody talking covertly with another person about me. It was one of my stalkers talking to somebody who worked in the same company I worked in, who was being recruited. And that knowledge allowed me to turn the tables on them, and it resulted in a great victory. And that's not the only time that sort of thing has happened. And I was just talking to you before we called about a chapter in my book called MC Realities, called MC and Religion, MC being mind control. I prefer the term political control technology. It's less tinfoil hat, So anyway, in that chapter, it talks about the science of, if you will, or the mechanics of how mind control or stalking methods psychologically work on the mind, and conversely, how prayer and spiritual truths can counter those very same processes.
Oh yeah.
So I guess that's as close as I can come to answering that question.
Well, I think that was a fantastic answer. I do want to volunteer this information about myself. This interview is so important to me right now, Mr. Sweeny, because I am a victim of targeting. I was targeted for over 5 years, nonstop, throughout the night, throughout the day, all around the clock. I was targeted. And I guess with that being said, I guess people are probably wondering what targeting is. So if you can describe it to us, that would be much appreciated. My question to you is, what is targeting, and why do you think that targeting has been implemented? And I want to say to the viewer of this video that I will be reading from a page. You will see me reading some commentary sent to me by Mr. Sweeny, and I also will be commenting on what he sent to me and asking questions. So if you see the paper waving around, you guys know that I will be doing an awful lot of reading in this interview. So Mr. Sweeny, Michael, what is targeting and why do you think it has been implemented?
Well, there's basically two kinds of targeting. There's the stalking is the overall term that can be applied to either. Mm-hmm. And stalking can either be a personal thing where you have some sort of a psychopath or a person who's just extremely motivated by anger or some other emotion to target someone. Mm-hmm. And those have a variety of reasons and purposes, but as a rule, the ones we really worry about there are people who have a propensity for violence. Perhaps they're psychopaths or sociopaths. Mm-hmm. But then there's another class of targeting that you're referring to or experienced, at least I presume so, based on what I've heard of it. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of the 12,000 people that I've worked with over the decades, that would be described as either organized or gang stalking. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's called dogging. In fact, that's the term that was used by the KKK, who pretty much, they didn't actually invent it. I mean, it's a very old technology, but in America, that was the first time it came around to being used in an organized fashion.
Mm-hmm. Dogging, that was something that the interdimensional beings were using with me, that term.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, the reason is either a technical reason from their point of view, or it's a targeting that is done because they fear the individual they're targeting. They fear something they know or they think they know, mm-hmm. or something they may be doing or might do. Mm-hmm. They're really rather paranoid, which is ironic because one goal of that kind of targeting is to make the victim look like they're paranoid. And if they're mentally ill, obviously they'll be ignored by law enforcement or anybody they seek help from. Mm-hmm. And that's why the title of my first book was The Professional Paranoid. Because if they're going to call you paranoid, you might as well be the best paranoid.
I know that's right.
and I can't take credit for that. My publisher's the one who wanted that title. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In any event, on the technical side of it, there are two other reasons a person could be targeting, and one is to, both are really the same reason. If they make a guinea pig out of some random person who fits a given profile suitable for the purpose, which is to train new stalkers in the organized organization, or to test new methods.
Yes.
And we see the average stalking victim of organized type is going to be likely stalked for life, unless they can break free of it. And there's really only two ways you can break free. Mm-hmm. If you have been targeted for a very long period of time. You're very lucky to have only been targeted 5 years. Usually, after about 5 years, it becomes almost impossible to break free. using the kinds of methods that I would employ as a consultant, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Until I discovered one method, which is the method that the Free Will Society employs, and we'll talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But, the other method is spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why there's a whole chapter in my book, MC Realities, on MC and religion.
Yes, I am saved and sanctified and filled with the Holy Spirit. I will tell you that. I had to get saved, and I'm not just saying saved as in everyone's gateway is Jesus Christ, but I tell you that there is truth in that word of God when you start using it. What I want to ask, I want to read this. It says FBI statistics find stalking has been the fastest growing crime segment, even internationally. And in fact, the growth rate is accelerating so rapidly that the CDC has declared stalking as a growing mental health a disease of the mind. There were 12 million cases reported in 2019. FBI stating that only half of the cases are ever reported. That number is interesting because it has also been estimated that there are 12 million targeted individuals in America who are stalked by a special type of stalking commonly termed as organized or gang stalking or dogging. The term it was first known when established by the KKK after the Civil War to target blacks, carpetbaggers, and other sympathizers of the freedom movement. I hope I read that all right. It was a mouthful.
I'm very morose when I have a keyboard in front of me.
Yes. So I guess my question to that, or my reaction is, with so many people having been targeting, what kind of things, what happens to a person when they're being targeted or stalked, and can you provide some examples?
Sure. First of all, it's extremely varied. A person who's stalked will actually be stalked covertly for perhaps 6 months before any action is actually taken against them. And that's so that they can achieve a very complete psychological profile. If one already exists, for example, maybe they're seeing a psychiatrist or have seen one, they'll have access to that by hook or by crook. But they want more than that. So, for example, they want to know, are you the kind of person that always uses a turn signal? I mean, little details like that can be useful to them later in one way or another. And of late, we've come to believe that they use a computerized system called Q methodology. I find that Q is ever present in today's social media in a number of contexts. This is unrelated, but I do find it interesting that the letter Q exists in AI technology, it exists in social media, it exists in psychiatry, it exists in mathematics, it exists in a lot of different contexts. So I'm thinking there may be some spiritual aspect of the letter Q that I'm not aware of.
Just like the letter G. Yes.
I do know that different alphabets historically assign a numeric value to each letter of the alphabet. And I haven't really dug into it, but most numbers and letters, therefore, do translate to a meaning or something that's normally either spiritual to the biblical context or to the satanic context. Sometimes one of each. That's how there's a relation.
That is, I know you were making a point, but I wanted to say this. That is that arithromancy that I was telling you about, whereby they use numerology in a satanic fashion to create some sort of unwanted unmanifestation.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was noticing, I think it was 3 years ago, the United States government began buying, no, it was further back in history, and that was under, I think, the first or second year of Obama. They began ordering huge quantities of ammunition, so much so that it threatened to, and seemingly today has limited the availability of ammunition. And there were many things very curious about these orders, but what I noticed is that the numbers, the quantities that they were ordering, every single number was had satanic numeration or valuation attached to them. But I kind of digress there, and I apologize. So to further answer your question, the general symptoms of targeting don't really take place until after they've done the evaluation, and then the symptoms will depend on that evaluation. So for some people, they might choose some low level of harassment to start, such as phone calls that are dead air or have funny noises on the end of the line, or excuse me, I do not get a chance to talk a lot, so I will be coughing a lot.
Take your time.
My voice will go raspy.
But any form of harassment that kind of puts you a little bit on edge and makes you wonder what's going on and just creates an air of mystery in your life. It may start with something simple like that, or may start with something more nefarious, like making it clear that you're being followed. Usually they do want you to notice that something is going on. They want you to react in a certain way, and whatever way you come to think of to react is what they intend. So the trick early on, if you were able to realize you were being targeted early on, which fortunately was exactly what I was able to do, and how I managed to defeat my stalkers. There are things you can do to counter, but the easiest is simply to do something other than your instincts at first tell you. And that will make them doubt the value and correctness of their psychological study. And it can set them back, and that it can cause them to make mistakes. It can lead to discovery of who, how, and why. Those are the big three. The average targeted individual never knows those three. They think they know. They'll get clues that are deliberately fed to them to give them a false impression. So almost every one of the, well, let's put it this way, out of the 12,000 people I've worked with, I would say less than 10 people actually had the correct answer as to a who, a why, or a how. And none of them had all three. So anyway, better examples would be the types of targeting in organized stalking. Would be some of the scariest would be voice to skull, where they begin to hear things that no one else can hear, typically dialogues. It would be potentially implants. Might be tracking implants. It could be implants that cause pain or other physiological symptoms. It can also be something like directed energy weapons designed to either controls the psychological mood, the wake and sleep states, things of that sort, or it might be to cause physical discomfort, pains, even burns.
Oh yeah.
Denial technology. And like I say, every person is different, but what will happen if it's a political targeting, well, I shouldn't use the word political because it isn't necessarily political, but the gang stalking, if it is that type of stalking, typically they will evolve from one technology or method to another once they have gotten some sort of degree of control of and assurance of that particular method working the way they want it to. Then they may choose to involve a higher echelon technology or method. And so a person who's been targeted for 20 years or so will have a long litany of things that they are beset by. I have one lady, my very first client, as it turns out, and one of my most loyal supporters, very lovely lady who's elderly like myself, and a very strong supporter of the Free Will Society. She's actually a member of the board of directors, advisors, I should say. And she has such a long list of problems that she's experienced that it's almost impossible to stay on top of it. You by the time you're trying to address one item with a proper defense, some other item is replaced it. So it's very difficult when you're a long-term victim. And that's why I say you're lucky that you were able to end it within 5 years. And I ended mine in about 5 years too. It took about that much time to really understand what was going on and identify that who, how, and why.
I can remember, and it's interesting that you said that they start with one form of control, and when they've mastered that form, then they move to sort of like the next level of control. And I can remember this, they used to send, I call it the interdimensional beings or demonic realm, used to send people around me to kind of mock me. And so I would always look, every time something was happening to me, whether or not it was the destructive endeavors that I was experiencing within my body. So it would be, like you said, sometimes the burning or the just physical pain and stuff like that being triggered from somewhere. Well, anyway, I can remember I would look up every time I had something bothering me, I would look up what the cause of that was on Google. So one day they sent a man walking by me with dreads, and he was sort of mocking, and he kept looking at his phone as though he were like me, like I used to be, just Googling away on my phone to try to find some sort of a solution as to what was happening to me and why it was bothering me. And then he threw down his phone, and it was a storm. And after that storm, I found that all of the things that were happening to me were supernatural. So it was kind of trying to show me, oh, you think that it is the military, or you think that it's a single person who has chipped you and has caused you to go through this, but really, you really got a bigger problem on your hands, because we've mastered you this much that we can now unveil and start showing you that this is coming from the supernatural realm, that these things that you are experiencing are coming from the supernatural realm. And if I tell you that I started receiving, after having left Georgia where the targeting began, and because it started out supernatural for me as well, but after having left Georgia, moved all the way to California, the same supernatural stuff was happening, only it was happening at a more magnified level, right in plain sight. So I just find that very interesting that you said that they would take control in one aspect, and when they mastered that aspect, then it kind of goes up another level to have some form of other control. Anyway, I wanted to describe that. I'm using this interview to tell on the beings as well. So with that being said, do you think now that targeting has something to do with the spiritual realm?
Oh, absolutely. Not always in the direct way that you describe. I run into I don't know if I could put a percentile on it, because I've never really kept records of, like hash marks to keep track of how many people have a particular situation, but I would have a sense of that maybe 5% or less would have a true sense of it being a spiritual warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do, we have to really be careful, because that actually may be the illusion that has created for them, when maybe really it is the government or somebody. I'll give you a good example.
Could be.
Pardon me.
Mm-hmm.
A good example is, I had a lady who said that she was being stalked or targeted by beings from another planet, space beings, creatures, and come to find out, it appears that it was the CIA drug operation. That they were handling hazardous materials for the manufacture of drugs, wearing biohazard suits, and by giving her LSD and other methods, they were able to make her think they were spacemen. And so I have seen that time and time again, where the victim believes one thing and it's really another. But yes, spiritual, because if you go back to Adam and Eve, very first mind control operation was undertaken by the serpent. That was definitely a spiritual operation.
Yes.
And that mind control operation is what we today refer to as disinformation, or if you prefer the term, propaganda. But if you can control somebody's actions because you've given them information that is false, that is a form of mind control. You're controlling their actions through changing what they think about themselves or the things around them. They dictate their actions thereby. And then coming forward in time to the modern time, when we talk about true mind control, political control technology, CIA, and of course they're not the only ones in that game, but CIA's mind control operations during the time from their creation in 1947 through approximately 1970. By the time they got to 1970, they had undertaken experiments involving every possible satanic mechanism. So everything from voodoo to tarot cards, numerology, witchcraft, sacrifices of human life, you name it, they've tried it. And, in point of fact, if you go back further, let's say to the times of the Crusades, the Knights Templar in the Middle East were going up against the assassins, which were Hashemites, who had a drug culture. So they would get themselves high for their religious ceremonies, which involved well, if you go back far enough in the Hashemite history, you're talking about worship of Baal, which means sacrifice of children. But in the Assassins' days, what they did is they had ritual sexual abuse of children. And they learned that created essentially what today we would call a programmable person. It created psychological personality splits and become monochromatic, and so you would find some that would make excellent warriors. And that's where the assassins originated. Now, the Templars got involved with the assassins. They both respected each other's fighting capabilities. And the Templars learned from the assassins some of their methods, and they corrupted the Templars. They were therefore thrown out of the church and went into hiding. And in my research for some of my books, I've come to the conclusion that they resurfaced under the Rosicrucians, disguised as Rosicrucians. Some disguised themselves as Jews, and some disguised themselves as Masons in the early Masons Guild, and eventually that became the Freemasons. So we have all of these groups, and if you take a close enough look at them, all of them have various elements of satanic principles or worship in their organizational structure and activities. if you read the what's called the Masonic Bible, Morals and Dogma, Albert Pike, who created the KKK and the dogging we were talking about earlier, it's very clear that it's at its highest 32nd degree and above layer. Its principles are in satanic principles. And I'm sorry, I got a little long-winded there.
No problem. You just keep bringing up point after point that kind of describes to me, because I even know that before I was targeted, when this gentleman that I was running around with when I was a singer in Georgia, he petitioned me. He asked me, he said, I want you to usher in the New World Order. And he had the characteristics of that of a person that would be in the KKK. I can't believe I was dating this guy. and he was Caucasian, and he had characteristics of a person that would be in the KKK. And so I find that very interesting too. But some of the tactics that you're describing are some of the characteristics that this gentleman had. So I think that that's amazing that you were able to put that together. Is there a way to escape targeting, in your opinion? Is tapping into one's spirituality, I think you said that earlier, but is tapping in one's ability to tap into their spirituality a basis for escaping being stalked and targeted?
Well, yes and no. Every individual, of course, has a potential, at least, for having a different picture of their spiritual reality. For example, for one thing, you'd have different faiths, different denominations. You might be a Jew, you might be a Muslim, you might be a Christian, you might be a Buddhist, you might be an atheist. All those different realms. They do seem to predominantly target Christians. Secondly, predominantly they target Jews. Thirdly, predominantly they target Muslims. Well, what do those three faiths all have in common? They are all worshipers of the same God of Abraham. And beyond that, other people that are targeted, I believe they're probably not chosen because of their religion, but for some other purpose. But when I speak to somebody, and in my chapter on MC and religion, I point out that, well, I'm writing this from the perspective of a Christian because I have this thing called the Bible, which I believe to be authoritative, and I believe it demonstrates that it's authoritative because it also encompasses the Jewish faith in the Old Testament, and it also even forecasts the coming of the Muslim faith. And therefore that tells me that it is the one to book. And I'll give you another reason I think that. And that is because there is only one other religion on earth that acknowledges that, and that's Satanism. Satan specifically targets those three religions, but in a way of divide and conquer to keep them fighting amongst themselves.
Yes.
And therefore, I write it from that viewpoint, but I do say that the basic mechanics of spiritual warfare of good versus evil apply regardless of your faith. If you pray to Allah, the act of prayer itself is a mechanical process in terms of what takes place in the brain chemically. And it does counter the chemical process changes that take place under targeting. And so it is still a tit for tat spiritual warfare taking place within the mind. So the book does give you that ability, but in practical application, especially if one's been targeted for more than 5 years, at the best, all you're going to be able to do is typically provide yourself additional layers of protection and more victories, lessen the suffering, but you can't stop them from doing what they're doing. In fact, they will redouble their efforts and they will hit you harder at first. And so you have to get better and better at defeating them. But is there an ultimate solution? I believe I have found it, and it doesn't seem to matter what kind of targeting it is. It was an experiment we created in the Free Will Society. I call it Free Will Haven, which is the idea of a safe and secure intentional community. And we're seeking to build up enough money that we can buy a deeply rural farm or ranch setting somewhere to act as a centralized service and have people who are victims come in and live in either a tiny home or an RV or a dorm setting, or if they want to just camp, they can do that. We would hope to be able to rent rooms if somebody just wanted to come and stay for a short while. And the idea there is if it's only targeted individuals, and if it's a properly secure site, there's no way for the targeteers, the perps they like to be called in the community, no way for them to target. Even electronic weapons become useless because there's no line of sight for the electronic beams to reach the target. And, a lot of people in the community believe in satellite targeting. Technologically speaking, I don't believe it's possible. Satellites can be used in targeting, but not on the individual basis. Unless you've got a satellite dish built into your head, they're not going to receive a signal strong enough that it will do anything. But because a lot of people believe that, we hope that the structures in our community will have metal roofs and walls that would stop such signals. So that's the one surefire fix, because it ends the perp's abilities to reach you. It doesn't really stop the intention, but they're just frustrated.
I want to read something else that was sent to me. It says the targeting falls into either the category of guinea pig, which you mentioned, used for training new stalkers or testing new methods, a person's deemed as a threat to someone or some dark criminal project who must be neutralized, be the threat real or simply imagined as possibly the case. The goal either eventually is always the same: to reduce the victim to political, social, and financial zero, who be thought mentally ill if coming forward with whatever truths might be feared. Now, that's really interesting because me personally speaking, I got a diagnosis of mental illness. It's really interesting. I know that in my case, when I was diagnosed with mental illness after a so-called professional looked at a book after interviewing me and came up with a diagnosis on the spot without ever even having seen me multiple times to make that determination. That information was then transferred to other agencies that work with me who claimed that there was no cure for my so-called disorder. And I'm still fighting this now. So for the targeted person who has been diagnosed with a mental illness, how might they supersede that mental illness diagnosis?
Well, that is a tough nut to crack. The problem is the psychiatric community has long been infected by Central Intelligence Agency. The very CIA scientists who did the original research have come to head every professional psychological organization that they might choose to join, and to become the professors teaching psychology at the more major universities specializing in it. And they have become the persons who write the actual DSM-V books that psychiatrists use to diagnose with. And so therefore, the first psychological victim of mind control are psychologists themselves, who have been taught at school and instructed according to the DSM books that mind control does not exist, and therefore if anybody believes they are under mind control, then they are mentally ill. And also, more than that, voice to skull technology does exist. The patents exist. It has been actually illustrated, and when I say illustrated, I mean in incontrovertible ways. For example, a gentleman that I know named Nick Begich, who is the son was the son of a senator, and the senator has passed away under mysterious circumstances. It happens. He has actually demonstrated before the European Union government body how voice to skull can be artificially created by technology. But yet, even in the face of the patents, the psychiatrists will refuse to believe it possible. You must be mentally ill if you're hearing voices. So we cannot go to them for that kind of help or expect that kind of reprieve. But what I do usually suggest is when the person first believes they're being targeted and starts to get a sense that people are thinking them paranoid, is go ahead and get an evaluation. Just don't bring up the targeting. Just tell them that you want to have a consultation, and if they ask you what's troubling, just say, "Well, I'm just having some social problems. I feel like sometimes people are picking on me." And they'll ask questions, and just avoid answering anything about the perps, as it were, or the things that they're doing to you specifically. And you're likely to end up with a clean bill of health, and just ask for a copy of that in writing. Because people sometimes seem to try to say I'm crazy. And then you can use that to show to anybody who is important to you, like family members or friends, co-workers who may have said something. You say, hey, doctor says I'm fine. What's your problem? But that isn't going to help you with, say, law enforcement particularly. It might, but if you go forward with law enforcement and you start talking about targeting, they're going to jump to that same conclusion, and they have an additional reason besides the same ones that psychiatrist has, and that is, it's a heck of a lot of paperwork and work for them to actually try to prove what you're saying is true. They don't have the tools or the knowledge or the base to go forward with that. So it's much simpler for them just to say, I recommend a visit to county mental health. And they do like to do that. It happened to me, even though I had already been seeing a psychiatrist, and he thought that I don't want to say what he thought because it would be braggadocious. But hey, that's twice I've used that word today. So anyway, he would have given me a clean bill of health. But the police officer writing police report decided that he didn't believe my story, and so he thought I was crazy. Even though my wife had the same exact story.
Well, I'm gonna tell you something that I did when I wanted to start telling, but I had long been diagnosed with this so-called mental illness that they just looked in the book on the spot and said that I had. But what I did was I found an organization, and I'm not endorsing this organization, but I do feel like a person that happens to be experiencing targeting and they feel like it might be attached to the supernatural, they can access this organization. It's called Spiritual Emergent Service, and it is a mental health organization. And I'm going to read their About Us page to you. It says the term spiritual emergence has been used to refer to the awakening of the spiritual potential within an individual that initiates the unfolding and expansion of that individual's way of being. It is a natural process of growth towards a deeper, more connected and expanded way of being that usually occurs slowly throughout our lives and is gently integrated. When this process occurs rapidly or becomes very intense, it can seem disruptive and out of context with everyday life, causing a personal crisis, which is referred to as spiritual emergency. Spiritual emergence can also be referred to as Kundalini awakening, shamanic journey, mystical experience, awakening the divine within, psychic opening, out-of-body experience, or near-death experience. Spiritual emergence may be initiated or intensified by major life transitions, trauma, terminal illness, physical or emotional distress, the use of the use of drugs. I'll just say that. Here I am. I'm Dr. RichWell, right? What else? As well as through intensive psychotherapy and practices such as breath work, certain types of yoga, deep prayer, and meditation. Although emergence is a natural process, traditional Western medicine is helping professions have not generally recognized it. Spiritual emergence has the dual nature of being potentially deeply healing as well as potentially deeply disturbing. When those experiencing disturbed manifestations of SE seek traditional healthcare, they may feel misunderstood or have been diagnosed as emotionally disturbed and prescribed medication or other medical interventions. The healing potential of the emerging spirit is often distorted or smothered, and the aim of symptom management becomes the goal of therapy. The Spiritual Emergence Service believes that it is essential that the support of SE is open, compassionate, and holistic. That is supporting the whole person, body, mind, and spirit. Our aim is to support the process and the individual by providing support and information as well as access to alternative healing professionals. Now, I know I read it all, but I feel like all of what they said was very important, especially when they start talking about the Kundalini awakening, the shamanic journey, the mystical experience. What I also like about this organization is that they have therapists who have been licensed and authorized to perform mental wellness services on individuals who actually come to them. Now, I say this because when I was going to traditional places to try to get help, they didn't know what I was talking about. Some of them knew of the term gang stalking, but really weren't delving into it. But as soon as because I didn't have the money to get these services. As you know, when you're targeted, they hit you where the pocket is too when you're targeted. So at that particular time, I didn't have the money to be able to get their services, paying for services in Canada. But I would often take this document to other professionals, and these professionals didn't know these terms, the term Kundalini awakening, the term shamanic journey, but it caused them to want to look up this information, and it gave validity to some of the supernatural phenomena that I was describing to them that I was having. And that's when I started making headway to even be able to open up the conversation, to start telling on the gang stalkers who were stalking me, and to create a reporting mechanism so that after I told the behavior of the gang stalking and the targeting had almost become predictive, and then I can go back and report more. And I started seeing the targeting subsiding after I opened up a channel and a gateway to be able to report what was actually going on with me and having the evidence that was actually occurring. But I essentially took another organization that focused on the spiritual side of counseling and took it to organizations who specialized in that. Now, I know that was a mouthful. That was a tactic that I used. I'm sure you have many tactics that you can recommend that a person participate in order to stop being targeted. But I wanted to share that with the general public just in case it might work for them too.
Well, it rings some bells for me, a number of them actually. The first I want to start with is how that parallels the physical health aspects of being targeted. Mm-hmm. Because when you go to a doctor, and let's say you've been hit with dew weaponry that causes pain.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the interesting thing about symptoms of targeting is every symptom associated with targeting could be because of some physical health problem, or a mental problem in some cases, but primarily physical. I mean, even mental problems tend to be physically based, like a chemical imbalance in the brain, for example. So it is important that if a targeted individual is experiencing a particular symptom that is pain related, for example, they should consult a physician, not talk about targeting, just talk about the symptom. There can be tests that can be undertaken. They might try a therapy, and of course, if the tests come back negative and the therapy isn't working, then that means it's not that, it's something else, and then that allows the victim of the targeting to work on a different kind of defense, such as I might offer in my books or consultations. And allow me to segue. It is true. I offer consultations.
Yes. I got your consultation too when I was going through being targeted.
So what happens is, when somebody contacts me about targeting, I send them a free help kit. It's very massive. And it tries to address a wide variety of things, and not everything applies to everybody, but there's something there for everyone. And then one of the options is they can choose to write me. If they'll ask me a generic question, I'll give them a generic answer, and it will be free. I charge for my services. It worked out to be rather expensive and unmanageable for them, and emotionally unmanageable for me over time. After several decades of it, it reduced me to some sort of emotional vegetable. I cry during movies. I didn't used to, but I do now. So anyway, it's important that you worry about the physical aspect in the same way you're describing going to these folks. It sounds like a very good service. You worry about the spiritual aspects. And I like the broadness of the terminology that they have employed. Is the same that I use when I'm talking about MC and religion. Except that I quote from the Bible generously. I don't quote from other sources. I'm sure they're able to do that. And the second thing is, when you seek help from somebody like that, that holistic approach is very, very valuable. And the DI should take that holistic approach, again, with their physiology, then their health. Aromatherapies, light therapies, music therapies, anything and everything you do to make yourself feel better, to help counter the negativeness that's being forced on you constantly.
Metaphysical practices.
Extremely important.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, even if it's just playing a computer game or something to get your mind off of things, you've got to use every tool you can to gain a little bit of headway. And the more that you can do that, will come the opportunities to make larger headway. And I'm sure that within the spiritual side, when you can get some help to the level that you've just described, that sounds very entertaining. Where in Canada are they, do you know?
I don't. Let me take a look at that website really quickly. I intend to get services from them. I think I'm going to get an evaluation from them, not telling the devil my tactics, but I'm just but let's see. Ooh.
While you're looking that up, for the listeners, if you want to contact me, my email address is pro for professional, paranoid for paranoid, group for a whole bunch of people, pro paranoid group. That's a concatenation actually of the title of my first book, The Professional Paranoid, at gmail.com, and then I'll send you the health kit. And in that health kit, it will tell you all about the Free Will Society and how to learn more about that. And what we're doing right now that's very interesting is we can't afford to go out and buy that farm ranch. I have found a community that already had 6 people in it that we found so far who have been stalking individuals who are not stalked anymore here. There's something about the physical layout of this town and other aspects of it that would seem to deter the normal methods employed. And I've seen that in play. And we now have 4 society members that are here targeting free for the first time. And so there's 10 of us now. And what we hope to do is, most of us are living in either RVs or spaces that we rent from somebody, an apartment or whatnot. And we're not living together like we would in the intentional community, but we're together enough that we can watch each other's back. Nobody is more than 5 minutes away from anybody else. So our idea is that we will caravan to the actual Free Will Haven once we're able to acquire such a place. And so now let's get back to what you find out.
Yeah, so Spiritual Emergence Service Society is located in Vancouver.
Oh, well, that's close to me. I'm in Westport, Washington. So if you go, you might pick me up on the way.
Well, let me tell you something. They have all sorts of ways to do appointments, and so I would be requesting telemedicine.
But you're pretty good at telling.
Yes. This is one of my last questions before we start doing whatever next. And this is something that I'm going to read from you. It says, the one common denominator in almost all stalking is that the clever stalker will, by psychological means and clever methodology or technology, ensure that the victim does not correctly perceive the critical details of their stalking such that they can mount reasonable and useful defenses or learn how and why of the matter. Now, I'm going to tell you, when I stopped getting targeted at the capacity that I was, it felt like the whole world was targeting me, and I was just about truthful with that. For me, that was a truth for me, that at that particular time, the whole world was targeting me seriously. But in my case, I was able to put terms to what they or the stalkers were doing, and most terms came from that of like ancient occult practices. I would find out what they were doing, and then I would give it the terminology. Not only was I able to describe these spiritual terms, I actually use these terms and describe them to others so that I could actually tell on them. In my case, I began telling in therapy sessions, which I mentioned before, which made their targeting almost predictive and could also be proven because it had already been described. I think that for this very reason, I'm no longer targeted at the capacity of which I was. Now I'm not certain that this could happen for every individual who has been targeted, but I think that access to a mental health service for every individual who has been dealing with matters of spirituality and spiritual, I just feel like access to, like you said, mental health services, such as an organization like Spiritual Emergence or whatever, something dealing with spirituality will help a person have a foundation of being able to describe what is happening to them so that they're acceptable to other organizations. So kind of like some prep work to be done. But I was able to define what it is that they were doing to me. And because I put definition to it, the targeting actually subsided. Another mouthful.
Hi. How are we doing?
Small audience. I would concur. Even a pastor or a minister could be useful in some cases, not every case, but A lot of targeted individuals actually find that church members are turned against them by their perps, and so that often will backfire. But I've had very good results from my pastor. I've had now. Okay, let's talk about Christian churches for just a second here. Christian denominations have been split upon split upon split upon split. So we started, of course, with the original Lutheran movement that split from the Catholic faith, and it became the defining Protestant church. Amid which additional splits then began to take place, and every church that is a Christian saving church today evolved out of that Lutheran body. So my reasoning in choosing a church was to choose the Lutheran faith. And it turns out the Lutheran faith has at least three splits. And so I elected the most conservative, which is the Wisconsin Synod. And I had some wonderful experiences. I went to and I had just come out of a cult. You may have heard of Heaven's Gate.
No, I've never heard of it.
Oh, it was right there in California. Heaven's Gate was a suicide cult. But when I encountered these folks, they didn't call themselves Heaven's Gate. They just called themselves the Two. It was a man and a woman. And they had this innate ability to kind of draw you in, hypnotize. And they convince people to sell everything they own and follow them. And so they just had a growing number of people. Anyway, I came into it in their influence, but I realized it was a cult. So I decided it was time that I got churched. So I went to, I chose this a Wisconsin Synod church, and I went there and I had a very specific question I wanted to ask the pastor as sort of a test to see if I was making a good decision. And he answered that question in the sermon. So I went away with a feeling, oh gee, wow, that was something. That was almost like a little miracle. And I thought, well, what's the next question I should be asking based on that answer? And I went back the next week with that question in mind, and he answered that in the sermon. It happened 3 times in a row, and I was finally convinced. And from that point on, I've had very, very good results with my pastors. But this spiritual aspect cannot be understated. It cannot be overemphasized. Cannot be overstated. We need to consider the holistic approach. We have to worry about the physical side. We have to worry about the mental side. We have to worry about the spiritual side. So there we are in a triangle. And what is a triangle but the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost?
Yes. Well, I will say that during the time that I was still, I'm not going to deny it. I'm not going to say that it was a government using anything on me to make me believe that interdimensional beings, it was that same spirit. I mean, it used to talk directly to me through people, almost predicting what I ate for breakfast or predicting, not even almost. But I can remember going into a church and seeking refuge, and that church, the whole church, they just mocked me and mocked me and mocked me. And it was almost something that was trying to make me apprehensive about about attending a church, you know what I mean? And so it wasn't until the targeting started subsiding that I actually started visiting and going to other churches. But I did find that the use of metaphysical churches also helped the targeting subside. I will say that. I tried everything. All but the Church of Satan.
Yeah, that's not a good one. And, you know, I met a very powerful warlock, Satanist. Michael Aquino is a very famous Satanist. He retired as a general in the United States Army, but he was involved in a lot of CIA programs and U.S. Army programs, psychological warfare and mind control related, and that includes ritual sexual abuse of children. He was a very powerful person. His aide, I cannot remember the man's name, was a member of the Church of Satan. Oh well, I don't want to say that because that's a very specific body, but he was a Satanist as well, and they worked as a team. Very powerful presence. If you were in his presence, he was just spellbinding, more so than the two. Extremely interesting to talk to. But the most interesting thing about it is, while he was not free of being a Satanist, he was completely opposed to using the power against anyone. It was like he was trying to escape or something. And he would be completely open in talking about his past and his activities. And it was very, very interesting. But you could tell he was still captured. He was still a prisoner. And yet he was seeking to escape, but yet he couldn't quite outreach and ask for help.
Yes.
Caught in that stuff, you don't come back very easily.
Yeah. I know there's some heavy stuff that's out there. I knew that I had to be careful, but I usually got fair warning anyway. Anytime I would visit a website, I would just have a physical pain or a sensation that I did not need to be there. There was something warning me about whatever, because when you're at your when you're targeted, you're driven to your wit's end. You're willing to try anything to stop being targeted. I know that I was. So.
Well, you just mentioned something, and I've lost that thought. Particular word that you said kind of triggered me. Oh, I hate it when that happens. Don't become 75 years old. You won't like the result. It was really important. I'm sure you'll miss it.
When I used to go to websites, I would feel a physical sensation throughout my body that told me that I didn't need to be there.
Oh yeah, that's it. The mind that is targeted in two ways. The conscious mind and the subconscious. And I happen to have been involved in the invention of arcuate text as a writing material or display of writing. And I wrote a science fiction book called In Mindless Times entirely in this arcuate text. And it actually solves dyslexia for most dyslexics, lets them read normally. And for regular people, it improves all four reading metrics. So you can read faster, you have better comprehension, and better retention and so forth. So we studied the mind and looked at a lot of patents, including some that I guess you could say at least revolved around mind control, and learned about the subconscious and the left brain, the right brain, and various parts of the brain. And from that, my understanding of the subconscious has benefited in terms of how it relates to a targeting victim and their defense. The subconscious is principally responsible for things like intuition and dreams and serious problem solving. The conscious mind is the reasoning mind, and it's where all of our senses come in and we make decisions. However, the subconscious has access to that, and what it does is it's defensively looking for clues of danger or threat. And so you get a strange feeling like, I feel I'm being watched, that's probably based on some real fact that you just didn't consciously become aware of, but your subconscious did. So you need to pay attention to your intuitional thoughts, especially if they're warning signs. And if the average targeted individual had done that, been able to know that and done that earlier, they would have been able to mount a very successful defense. Because they would have been forewarned, and then they could have reached out to somebody like me and gotten the advice that would have helped them to escape as easily as I escaped. That aside, there's more to it, and that is this. Many of the issues associated with symptoms of targeting, especially the pain and for some people ringing in the ears or that sort of a thing, where it's a constant matter, I've learned to tell my subconscious to solve a problem. And if the problem was of that sort, if I get a toothache, a burn, I have a neuropathy that bothers me. In fact, it has a significant impact on my life. But I do not have to take any medicine or painkillers. I am able to simply tell my subconscious mind to focus on the senses that are coming into my brain that tell me that it hurts or it bothers me, and ask it to invert that, like noise cancellation technology does in headphones. And it actually will significantly reduce the sensation or the sense of it. It might not completely go away, but it's no longer a problem. And so I would urge people who maybe suffer those kinds of things, when you contact me, mention it, because I have other documents that describe how one might try to learn to master this technique to address those kinds of issues.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. I don't think when I access your, now, let me tell you guys, now I'm talking directly to the camera here, to the viewer. I was able to access Mr. Michael Sweeney's consultation, and there was something that I had gone through that caused the supernatural interdimensional beings to try to convince me that I had sold my soul to the devil. I mean, they try to get tricky. And what Mr. Sweeney told me was that I could not, how could I sell my soul to the devil when I didn't even own my own soul? Let me tell you something. I stopped getting harassed after that. After I said it so many times, that type of harassment stopped, because they started building harassment based upon the fact that I had quote unquote or so-called sold my soul to the devil.
Yeah, show me the deed.
Yeah, show me the deed. That's right. And so he has so many tactics for you all to be able to take advantage of. If you are targeted, that's probably one that I've described, and then he's described a few, but I'm sure that there are a lot more. Our time is running out. I want to bring about the opportunity for you to announce who you are, how you can be contacted, etc.
Surely. Thank you. Again, my email contact would be proparanoidgroup@gmail.com, PROPARANOIDGROUP. And if you want to see a body of my work, if you type in my name, H. Michael Sweeney, or my trade name, Pro Paranoid, into a search engine, you should get roughly 12 million hits of people that are citing me or my work. A lot of those hits aren't really me, just, you know, how the search engines work. They'll do a shotgun approach. But anyway, that's a lot of hits, and most of them are me. Then my principal website for stalkers to get more information would be proparanoid at proparanoid.wordpress.com. And then you'll find my books, my videos, and my posts. You go to my posts, and you can select political control technology, and that'll list all the posts that relate to that. It's a wealth of material there. It's all free. And if you want to learn about the society, it's freewillsociety.wordpress.com. Membership is $25 a year. And if you want to talk about or investigate the idea of maybe joining us here, drop me a line. I do have an address for the society, which is for PayPal use only, and our corporate use only for outreach to people like the doctor. We might use it for that, but don't use it to contact me there. I don't really do dialogues there. In any event, that is Free Will Society at protonmail.com. So if you want to PayPal a donation to the society or to buy any of my books, use that. All the money goes to the society, 100%. I also happen to sell a t-shirt, but gosh, I probably haven't sold one of those in 5 years. I don't really push it. But anyway, all the money goes to the society, and I do have the consulting services. So you come, if you get the help skit, it'll explain all that. I can do a video conversation with you like we're doing right now. I can do it over the phone. There is a fee for that service, but it is potentially very powerful depending on how good a communication we have in describing your situation. And that fee also goes to the society. I'm retired, I'm living on Social Security, and having a very good life on $400 a month. I'm very happy with that.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. You can certainly count me in for contribution. I would like to see the Free Will Society really go further. I believe that more people that are targeted should be supported. We know that this thing exists. We need to be doing something about it. You are doing something about it.
Well, I thank you and bless you for that.
Yes. And again, I'm Dr. Magazine RichWell. I am here on behalf of the College of Metaphysical Studies, and we can be reached at www.tcomedu.org. That's T as in Tom, C as in cat, O as in owl, M as in Mary, edu.org. You can come to us to have some sort of edification of being in tuned with this realm of spirituality. You can achieve your degree with us. You can fellowship with us. You can participate in interviews with us. If you have something meaningful to bring the TCOM community and the people who actually are a part of broader society that support us. So thank you so much for viewing our dialogue together between one another. And I'd like to thank you, Mr. Michael Sweeny, for attending this interview.
I've enjoyed it very much. You're a great host.
Thank you.
I thank you, Doctor.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.